A long time ago, there was a sacred site where Wilax, or young boys, were gathered together for ceremony. Their bodies were cleansed and then painted with ochre. There was a Wilax named Gobo, but he was misbehaving. He did not know what was expected of him. Bonjol sat all the Wilax down and explained everything about the initiation and how important it was for them to become young Gulins, or young men. Bonjol pulled Gobo aside, told him to behave and said, "Do you see those rock formations over there? There are other young boys who did not do what they were told. They had no respect for the lore, the land, and the people." Gobo did what he was told, did not misbehave again, and all the Wilax went through their initiation and became young Gulins. This sacred site is known today as Hanging Rock.
As a Dja person, I am one of the traditional mobs that's associated with the gathering at Hanging Rock. From what I have learnt is that it may have been a men's gathering place. Because I'm a woman, it's not my right to learn about those practices.
We believe that that we own that place, that we belong to that place. We've got a traditional story that that relates to the Hanging Rock. So we look at that place totally different to the casual person that might look at it and think, "Oh, isn't that a wonderful looking place?" and go for a walk up it and look around it and all that sort of stuff and be mesmerised by the volcanic structure of it.
Hanging Rock, we believe, and I know, was Evanescent Country. It was a university, it was a chemist, and it was a supermarket for my people. The Bundine woman, who was our medicine woman, used to go there and obtain mushrooms and a leaf from the kangaroo tree, and the men would go there and they'd have ceremony and dance. But today it's used for rock concerts, and a lot of Aboriginal people go along there too, so technically it's still used for ceremony and dance, but in a modern context.
At least half of the information centre at the bottom of Hanging Rock dedicated to Picnic at Hanging Rock and the story of missing fictional white schoolgirls. But what there is of Aboriginal history of the area is actually kind of like somewhat vague and parts of it incorrect. They sort of attribute it to just the Wurundjeri people and not to the two other groups, the Tongarong and the Dja.
All we are is story. So every single human being, every single culture throughout the world can relate to story and storytelling. What do I think about those stories, about Miranda at Hanging Rock and all that? I think it's a great big lie. You know, it's don't let the truth get in the way of good stories.
I guess in some ways it's good to draw attention to Hanging Rock, but at the same time the belief that this fictional character is still lost on Hanging Rock, so people still go there expecting to find her remains, is quite interesting.
That's a good yarn, everybody likes one, don't they? You know, we've got stories like that. One of ours is about a bunyip who lived along the river, and the bunyip used to go along the tunnels and that, and if you're naughty late at night, we used to tell the children in the old days not to go near the river, or the bunyip would get you and he'd take you back to his tunnel, and it was half full of water and half air, and he'd keep you there, especially if you're naughty. They're just stories to try and protect you, like Noah of the Ark.
Picnic at Hanging Rock is a childhood story that they're very nostalgic about, and they have always seen it as an innocent story. So I think a lot of people were really unhappy with the kind of invitation to let Miranda go. And they see that Miranda must go and Picnic at Hanging Rock must go. They don't really attend to what's the real invitation behind the campaign, which is to actually just learn your history of that area and get to know more about Indigenous people and what they've had happen to them as a result of colonisation.
Oh, look, I think it's really sad, because if you're talking about reconciliation, then you really need to have a perspective on the Aboriginal culture and history there. Because if you call yourself Australian, then my history, Aboriginal history, is a very important part of your history and explains the past and where we are today and what we're doing.
Some of our history has actually been lost through time and being removed from our lands and not being able to practice cultural beliefs. So a lot of what we know has either been lost or it's written from a non-Aboriginal perspective, so it may not be correct.
Part of my research at Hanging Rock was to kind of try and uncover what was known about our colonial past and what, if there were specific stories of encounters between settlers and Indigenous people, like what records there were. Very few historians have bothered to find this information out. If you think about the amount of detective work that's gone into trying to prove that Picnic at Hanging Rock, the novel, is based in some sort of fact, but there has not been the similar detective archival work to try and show what happened to the Indigenous people of that area.
Basically, not Hanging Rock, but Victoria-wide, Aboriginal people weren't considered as human beings. They put in the Flora and Fauna Act. And what happened was the land was cleared and the roos were chased away and they started putting sheep and cows on the property.
People moving on to Aboriginal land and building houses and starting farms actually destroyed Aboriginal people's way of life. It forced Aboriginal people to attack farms for food because their traditional ways of foraging for food had gone missing, and then that meant that colonists would turn on Aboriginal people and kill them or remove them off the lands and send them to missions.
We come from the land, and that's our creator, our mother, and we believe that everything the land gave birth to was part of our extended family and given to us by Bunjil, like the Garden of Eden, for us to survive. And all of a sudden the roos went and the sheep were there, and law changed from LORE to LAW, and no one told us that someone owned those sheep, because we always thought that they belonged to the land. And when we went to grab them, they thought we were vermouths, and they rounded us up onto Aboriginal reserves, and eventually our population, or Wurundjeri, went from thousands and thousands. We were lucky to have 10 people left.
You often have monuments to white pioneers and explorers or white people that died in wars overseas. There's often monuments to lost white children in the area, but there's I was going to say few, but I think there's no monuments to Aboriginal losses and traumas in the region.
As far as we know, we've been here for over 2,000 generations. We're still here today, even after colonisation. We're probably not exactly the same as what we were then, and I suppose today we're living in two worlds rather than one world, so we have to navigate both worlds.
When people say the word Aboriginal, they have this stereotypical view of what an Aboriginal person looks like, being the dark skin, the broad nose, the curly hair, living out in remote communities, but that's not the case here in Victoria. I'm an Aboriginal person. I'm proud of who I am, and I don't fit that stereotypical view of what an Aboriginal person should look like. In this day and age, after colonisation, what does an Aboriginal person look like? We're all different in our own way, but it's what's inside that counts. It's our connection to country that we feel. Our
culture is about relationships. It's about relationships to other groups, to ourselves, to our families, our clans, and to everything else.
There's always a lot happening. Even some of the boundaries of our land is still in dispute. One of those areas is Hanging Rock. So there's 3 mobs from the Kulin nations who are all talking about Hanging Rock belonging to them.
The 3 groups have been coming together over several years and have been talking about this whole sense of a boundary. We're trying to navigate it. Probably the other groups say exactly the same as I do. They probably say that it's their place and they belong to it, and I respect them. I respect their right to say that, but I don't agree. I do agree that that's where we come together.
I don't believe it belongs to anyone. I believe that we should all share it. If it is such a significant site, then I'm sure we all have had something to do with it.
To quote another traditional owner from Jar Jarun, boundaries are places that bring us together, not fences that push us apart. This current society asks us to put fences up. Unfortunately, I don't think it gives us enough freedom to have a pure cultural association with one another.
My only wish is that, the history is taught and people learn about our ways and respect the land and respect the people and respect the trees and the animals. Everybody has a part of this life, part of evolution, so let's respect everybody and the way of the world.
I think that there needs to be a deeper reflection amongst the white Australian community in the sense of thinking about what kinds of stories we tell and what we don't tell.
My culture and my community is about the family unit, caring for country and looking after our heritage, so Australia has a black history.
For me, there was actually just this sort of absence of knowledge, an absence of historical attention to a period of history that would have explained why we don't know very much about Indigenous occupation of that area or what happened to them when colonists turned up. It was the realisation that that lack of evidence was evidence of something. The fact that perhaps early colonists were quite effective at eliminating Indigenous presence in that area. What effectively you could call genocide has occurred in that area, which means that you don't have these surviving testimonies of Indigenous people to kind of account for their absence.
A group of people come to this country some 200 odd years ago, and when they came with a written language. We had an oral language, so our way of knowing was about performance in some ways. This is how we knew the world, this is how we connected to the world. And because that's not written down in any way, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Speaking language and just speaking it alone doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
We have all this absent knowledge, but just because we can't locate it in historical records doesn't mean it doesn't happen. How do we commemorate a traumatic event and take responsibility as white Australians for a traumatic event that may not actually have very much evidence? It's like, how do we come to terms with absence, this gaping absence?
It's time to see all humans equal. It's time to give Aboriginal people an equal status in the Hanging Rock Information Centre. My story is important too. Shouldn't we tell the truth?